and welcome to the fifth episode of the 2020-2021 A131 lecture series. I hope you're all safe and well wherever you are in the world, because today we have an amazing guest that will be introduced by Elena in a minute. So today, Elena and I will be your moderators. First, I'd like to take a moment to briefly introduce you to this year's theme if you're joining us for the first time. As you may probably know, and hopefully you took part in it, last year's lecture series, Crisis Action, What is the Emergency?, aimed to start a debate on the role that the built environment plays in responding to the social, economic, and political crisis that our society is currently facing. So this year's theme, The Death and Life of Architecture, is instead focusing on the reinterpretation of these challenges, creating a parallelism between the stages of life and architecture. It is not only about analyzing the challenges, but it's also about questioning the way we interpret and tackle them. So in what way? Well, to explain this theme, we like to use a little anecdote. In an Aboriginal school in Australia, there was a painting on the floor symbolizing knowledge, with a child walking and talking alongside his grandpa. So to us, it was pretty clear. It is the grandpa passing on knowledge of what he experienced in life to the immature child. But that was actually a very Western way to see it. For the Aboriginal community, it was the opposite. The innocence of the child was a symbol of knowledge. Because the child was teaching and questioning what his grandpa always took for granted, it was a postulate of society. So our lecture series is trying to do the same, reversing the cycle of life, going from retirement to birth and then death, to question what we usually take for granted and the way we tackle these challenges we are now facing. So in total, we have 7 episodes, being retirement, adulthood, young adult, teenage, childhood, birth, and death, with the aim of switching our perspective from the experienced adult to the pristine child. Today, we're going to present our 5th episode, Childhood. If you missed our previous lectures, you can catch up on them by checking out our YouTube channel, which is linked in the Padlet, which we'll provide. So I'd like to leave you to Elena and our guests with one question in mind. Why do we, people, act the way we do? Is it the best way to do things, or is it just the one we're used to? And now, Elena, over to you.
Thank you, Fiona. So before introducing today's guest, we have just a few communications as always. First, I would like to remind you that the lecture is being recorded and it will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. Secondly, I would like to kindly remind you to make sure your microphone is off during the lecture. And the guest speaker is happy to take questions at the end of the talk. And I would like to encourage you to ask a question yourself by turning on your mic, or you can also write it down in the group chat or the Padlet link, which you can find in the chat box. I would also like to remind you to make sure to follow us on our social media accounts on Facebook and Instagram at A131 Strath, where you can keep up to date with our upcoming events. And as the communications are over, I would finally like to introduce you to our guest speaker, Tom Surman from Surman Weston, who introduced the practice hands-on approach to delivering projects before highlighting how a real understanding of how things are built allowed the practice to achieve maximum social impact at their Hackney School of Food project, which has been recently announced the winner of Civic Trust Award. Thank you, everyone, and Tom, the floor is yours.
Well, yeah, thanks so much for having me, and I hope that this fits the bill for the childhood section of this really greatly themed series. So I've got quite a lot to get through, so I'm just going to kind of plow on. So I'm Tom Surman from Surman Weston, and Surman Weston was formally established in 2014. And today we're a small team of just 4 people. And this slide that you can see here maybe would have been better for the early adulthood phase, but this was our first ever project. And we designed this cafe for the sculpture department of the Royal College of Art immediately after we graduated. And our conceptual approach to this was to insert a warm and playful timber box into the otherwise stark and cold warehouse structure of the sculpture building. And to sort of sum up how we set about this, I'd say scaffolding boards and a lot of TLC. we had a really limited budget, so we selected this almost free resource as the primary construction material. And then aside from the floor, everything you see in these images is made from scaffolding boards. So we cut, planed, sanded, bored, routed, oiled the boards and joined in just about every way we could think of. So that the boards form the service counter, the cafe shutters, the tables, the shelving. And we didn't know this at the time, but this way of working with materials to try and understand and elevate them was something that would go on to inform our practice. So here you can see the pile of reclaimed boards, which we just had to pay the cost to ship them from the scaffolding yard to where our project was. And then on the right, refined into a coffee table, and on the left, forming the counters and shutters of the cafe. In short, we absolutely loved this experience. It was an intense sort of 3 months realizing the project over the summer holidays. And when we finished it, the sculpture students were really pleased with it. And the project also got a bit of press and was published in Design and things like that. And it gave us the confidence that we could kind of just try and do more of the same. So this project was our next project, and it's a garden room for a writer in Hackney in London. And this was designed and built by us in early 2013. It's an all timber structure clad in cedar. And a bit like with the cafe, here we took the cedar and worked it. We used it as shingles for the roof and the walls, cedar slats for this screen you can see at the front here that covers the veranda, and also for finer joinery elements like the sliding door that allows you to enter the building. And in working it and deploying it in so many ways, we learned about its scent, about its antifungal, antimicrobial properties, about its softness. And here you can see kind of just how kind of widely it was used with, as I mentioned, with the kind of glowing screen here and behind, and here kind of forming a log store with the door meeting it. And we still look back on this project with real fondness. The client was absolutely lovely, had a strong brief and was critically engaged. And a bit like the cafe, we were very fortunate that the project went on to win a few awards and was shortlisted for the AJ Small Projects Award. And the kind of the press and the, I suppose, attention that we received for this just gave us, it was really the launch pad of the studio. And we believe we could kind of go on and kind of formally set up. So the final project I'd like to just briefly talk about before we get onto the main body of the talk, the School of Food. This was a project we called the Cork Study. And here, the kind of broad concept for the project was that it was an extremely tiny garden, and we wanted something that would feel earthy and natural and kind of sit quietly in its surroundings. So again, another garden room, and this time clad in expanded cork blocks. And at the time, this was really innovative. I think we were, I'm not totally sure, but I think we were the first to use this cladding on a new building in the UK, and it's subsequently been used by a number of other studios. And we were really interested in the cork because it's such a hyper sustainable material. It's a great carbon sink because it's harvested from the bark of cork oak trees. The bark then regrows back, is reharvested, and it actually helps the tree to be healthy, having the bark harvested. So I think the tree can be harvested 5 or 6 times, and you're just sinking carbon all the time. It's also it's also hydrophobic, so it works as a very good rain screen, and it has excellent thermal and acoustic insulation properties. So much like with the cafe and the Writer's Shed project, we sort of really learned how to work with the material, how to join it, how to fix it. The cork has an incredible scent whenever you opened up a new packet. And it kind of just has this wonderful soft acoustic about it. So we learned a lot about the cork working with the material. And just to sort of prove to you that I'm not lying, that we actually were doing the work, here you can see us kind of on various sites. So the Cork Study here and the Writer's Shed, and painstakingly laying the reclaimed parquet flooring in the RCA cafe. And so I've not really tried this approach before, but I'm going to play you now. I'm going to jump to the Hackney School of Food, and I'm going to play you a video that was made by the clients at the end of the project. And then I'm going to try and unpick the finished project and talk about how our approach and our understanding of construction hopefully led us to maximize the experience for the kids using the space. So hopefully this works. And I think you should be able to hear as well as see.
Hi, I'm Ritka, head gardener, and this is Tom, a chef and food educator. We both work at the Hackney School of Food, which has some incredible gardens and some very special helpers. Our gardens are in the grounds of Mandeville Primary School, a state school in Hackney, which is a part of the LIP Federation, so children from 3 schools can come and help us to tend the produce.
Inside the building, the architects have transformed this space, which is an old caretaker's cottage, into a wonderful teaching kitchen, where we bring the produce that we've harvested from the gardens outside, and we transform that into really tasty meals using lots of different cooking techniques. We are offering classes to schools across Hackney and London, and we are also working with the charity Chefs in Schools to bring local communities in to this wonderful food education hub.
Who lives there?
Bees.
There are bees.
Beehive there.
Yes. We have our own beehives, so children can learn about nature. And we can't wait to get our own honey from Hackney.
This is where cooking and growing begin to combine. In this area of the garden, our architect Surman Weston have designed the beds to be staggered in height so that all ages can use them. And as we go up the steps in the back, we've got this beautiful wood-fired oven overlooking the whole garden in the background. If anyone is interested in what we were doing here, the plans are available, and we'd really love to see the Hackney School of Food replicated all over the country and seeing more kids getting stuck into this sort of thing.
Hackney School of Food.
So hopefully you can all hear me again. Sometimes that video plays better than others, so I hope it wasn't too glitchy for you. So before I go on to kind of unpick the project, I just want to finish by summing up our experiences of working on sites and delivering those garden rooms ourselves. I suppose when you're working on site, when things are a problem, they're a problem right there and then, and you're kind of forced to try and find a neat solution. Otherwise, everyone has to down tools. And although today we don't build all of our projects, you know, for example, the School of Food was built by a contractor. Our experience is building and our enjoyment of material experimentation, I suppose, still underpin our approach. And having designed and built projects ourselves and also projects that others have built, we think it's super important to understand that the real nuts and bolts of construction, the nitty-gritty fiddly stuff, to best realize a broader concept. And so this isn't just about constructing efficiently, it's also about realizing things joyfully and beautifully and giving the client the best building you can within the constraints available. So talking about the client, The clients for our Hackney School of Food project, we had joint clients. So the LEAP Federation of Schools is a group of 3 state schools in the London Borough of Hackney. And the charity Chefs in Schools are a magnificent food education charity. And their model is they take restaurant trained chefs and then they place them in schools, and the chefs kind of retrain the school kitchen staff. And there's a gradual move away from kind of just dishing up frozen, pre-cooked food, which is often just reheated, into everything being cooked fresh and prepared on site, and also getting out into the classrooms and educating the kids about food. So there's not this kind of barrier between the kind of traditional school canteen, which is nothing to do with education, that is transformed so that the meals within the school and the food become a key part of the children's education. And so here you can see the site of our Hackney School of Food. So where I'm kind of dragging my cursor around, this is Mandeville Primary School in Hackney, one of the 3 LEAP Federation schools. And the area outlined in orange is our site. And this was a former caretaker's house, which had been redundant for 5 or 6 years. And this is quite common now, as when caretakers retire, it's kind of governmental policy in the UK that their incoming caretaker doesn't live on site. So there's lots of these buildings kind of becoming redundant. And this is a look at the building from the street on the left here. So it's kind of pretty unloved building that the kids were a little bit kind of scared of. We have heard kids calling it the kind of scary house or the ghost house. And then here in the back garden, which had kind of become overgrown and unloved. And, you know, this is, it was a typical kind of ground floor kitchen and dining spaces, and then upstairs bedrooms. And here you can see the site highlighted in orange within the broader context of some of the school site. And this is the outline of what's the main school building. And so I just want to kind of, before getting into the detail of the project, try and sum up our design approach that we took and how that was informed by some of our previous work. So fundamental to the client's brief was the idea that children learn by doing in a hands-on way. So they're not just watching other people, that everything they're being taught, they're physically doing themselves. And so we took this idea and tried to apply it to the building. So we settled on the approach that we would expose the construction ingredients of the building and the garden, so that the kids and adults who engaged with it could better understand how their space was put together. Or even if they didn't understand how the space was put together, they could ask questions like, what's that weird stuff on the roof? Or why is there that bit of metal there? And so this approach was, we were able to take this approach, and it was informed by what we had learned on site building, I guess. And so we knew we wanted to target the design and construction time and money on the areas that would add the most educational value. So where the kids and adults were really going to be interacting and learning, we would focus our design energy and a lot of the construction budget. And elsewhere, where work was required, but it wasn't as educationally critical, we'd take a more loose fit design approach that meant we could do stuff simply, beautifully, but also as economically as possible. And as such, in large parts of this project, the kind of architecture with a capital A is set aside, and is about architecture being an enabler for a better education. And so this slide is the eventual site plan. And in the middle here, you have the heart of the project, which is the educational kitchen. And then on the south side here, this is the new kitchen garden that you saw in the video with the step terracing, with a new public entrance. and on the north side, a courtyard access for students and visiting teachers, with food store and a couple of WCs in the former garage block. And so this is a view of the completed scheme from the street. And just to orientate you, this gate here that you see is this gate leading into the courtyard. And then you have the former garage block here, and then the facade of the main educational kitchen. And here in this view, you can see that gate into the courtyard, and you can also see this new entrance that was punched into the kitchen garden. And so the street facing elevation was enlivened by a mural which we commissioned from artist Jean Julien. Jean's a kind of internationally well-known artist who kindly agreed to do the work pro bono. Sorry, just bear with me. So just moving on to the next slide, I'm going to try and sort of walk you through the gardens first and then take you inside. So if you're about to enter this gate, here, this is the kind of view you're confronted with when you come through this gate. And I absolutely love this photo of the project because I think it really captures how we hoped the children would engage with the space. The step planters kind of double as places to perch and play on, and the kids are the kids become surrounded by the produce that they've grown from seed themselves. And it's just kind of for me that the image that really captures the joy of this project. So moving on, here is an aerial view of the garden, and before I spoke about this idea of kind of targeted spending and targeted design time. So in the garden, most of that is targeted on this area of masonry that you see here that comprises the step planters, a kind of masonry terrace, and at the far end here, a worktop combined with this pizza oven that allows the children to cook the food they've grown, harvested, and prepared in an interactive way. And so, having done a lot of construction ourselves, we're super interested in the process of construction, and throughout the project, we are on site as much as we can. And these two photos here just capture the construction of that masonry element, and we kind of worked with the bricklayers on site, kind of constantly tweaking things as we went along, to get what we hoped was the best possible outcome. And so here you can see the approach we took to adjusting existing openings on the existing building. And rather than trying to tooth in bricks to match or pretend that we hadn't modified these openings, we just took the approach of simply using the same kind of softer cottagey stock brick that we had used elsewhere in the garden and using that to infill the openings. For us, we felt that it added texture, it was simpler for the bricklayers to do, and there was also this nice kind of stitching in of the ground plane from the courtyard garden and then wrapping into the walls of the building envelope. Elsewhere outside, we added a kind of cafe style awning to provide solar shading. And again, this is a kind of very simple, non-fussy, but playful and effective way of providing solar shading on the south side. And that solar shading also kind of doubles as an outdoor teaching space. So here you can see Chef Tom kind of enjoying a nice day outside teaching, and the kids also eat at these tables once they've finished their cooking. And so, oh, sorry. Another loose fit addition was this agricultural water butt, which collects rainwater from the roof. The kids then use this water to go out into the gardens and water their plants, and they learn about water conservation in the process. And nothing is hidden away on this elevation. It's meant to be kind of plainly obvious that the water is coming from the roof. Also, kind of not particularly attractive ventilation here from the kitchen, but again, we weren't really worried about that. It had to perform its function, and it wasn't an area we were going to spend thousands of pounds on trying to conceal the vents. And so here, just a few images taken from a lesson with the kids up close and personal, seeing how their produce is coming on, and kind of Tom trying to get them to eat various herbs and spices that they're unfamiliar with. And so now I'm going to take you inside, and hopefully here our approach of the exposed ingredients and the loose fit combined with the more targeted spending becomes clearer. I think it's a bit clearer on the inside of the building than in the gardens. So here on the left, you can see the former first floor level, and on the right, you can see the former ground floor level and the stringer of the stair running up here. And this is the short section of the building as it is now. And so the primary thing that you can notice is that the first floor level was entirely stripped out. And that was stripped out because we just wanted to create a simple, bright, open and generous volume. We didn't need any functional requirements above, and it was really a kind of low and quite dark, gloomy space before. And the second key move, I suppose, in terms of the exposed ingredients and the targeted spending, was to establish this functional datum level. So you can see here that below this line of the splashback is the area in which everyone who uses the space is really interacting with it. And below this line was where we focused a huge amount of design time and careful planning and coordination with the clients to make sure that the kitchen would kind of provide the most bang for its buck, and would also be fun for the kids to use, and a kind of environment in which they could get the very most out of every minute spent cooking in there. And then above this line, everything is much looser. So hopefully it's kind of captured in this sectional drawing, but the steel ring beam that we had to insert to provide additional strengthening is just completely exposed and inserted in the simplest way possible. Where we've adjusted openings, the block work or masonry required to do so is left kind of unrendered, unplastered, and just painted over in the simplest fashion. And then coming up to the roof, as you can see from the previous slide, when we stripped out the ceiling because we had to get rid of some existing asbestos, it kind of revealed these rather nice roof trusses. And rather than trying to put a false ceiling back in, which would kind of be unnecessary expenditure, we just thought, let's just expose the joists. They had a really nice texture. And then the next challenge was, okay, if we're going to do that, we do need to re-insulate the roof to bring it up to building regs. So how do we kind of go about that in the most efficient and loose fit fashion, if you like? And so this long section of the building, again, I think these drawings, although they weren't meant to kind of do this, they just kind of, you get the sense that the bones of everything is kind of on display. And again, here you see this functional datum below which things are a bit more controlled. And above, the reason I included this long section is because you can see the heating for the space here, which was this radiant heater, which is often reserved for kind of heating warehouses or industrial facilities. But for us, it was the kind of perfectly fitting solution. It did the job. It heats the space just as required. It's a simple, cost-effective way to do that, and it's on the show. And actually, we kind of quite like the fact that when it's on, it glows red and sort of almost looks like the grill element of an oven. So in this photo, you can kind of see all of that from the section brought to life, if you like, and you can see how we have the exposed heating element above, and then the solution to the insulation was to use this spray foam insulation, because it would fully fill around the kind of quite fiddly roof trusses, and it was a very efficient way to get us up to the required U value. And then we were kind of faced with this the decision of, well, what do we do with that? And we just exposed it, because we liked the slightly surreal texture of it. It would have cost a lot more to try and disguise it. It also worked quite well as because of its extremely textured surface and its relative softness. It works very well as an acoustic baffle. And here you see it on site, kind of in its raw form, just after it was installed. And here you can see it. In the end, we spray painted everything in the same sort of off-white or light grey, just to tie it all together. So I think it was a little bit too clashy before, but this picture captures that kind of rather unusual texture of the spray foam installation. I have to say, not everyone loves it. We love it, but we've had a lot of people that really don't love it. And then the festoon lighting is simply hung from some galvanized conduit, which is fixed to the roof structure above. And this photo, again, kind of from during the construction process, captures this idea of the datum and the loose fit above and the more control below quite nicely, I think. You can see a trace of a former wall here that was ripped out. And then around the window reveals where we've made good, it's just kind of done in the simplest fashion possible. But again, it kind of adds to the highly textured palette above this datum line. And so here, I think this is the image that best captures that approach of targeted spending at one level and loose fit above. And so above the datum, as I've touched on, there's kind of traces of old walls, and there's bathroom tiles on the wall in one corner, the exposed ring beam, the kind of the exposed element heater, and with the trusses and the insulation above. And then this was a bit of targeted spending here, this puncturing in of the picture window, which allowed us to double up and use it as signage as well. But then below the datum, everything was extremely carefully designed and controlled. And that included the design of and development and fabrication of these height adjustable cooking stations. So here you can see the chef or demonstrator's unit set at a typical height. And here where the kids have been cooking, they're set lower. And then there's one over here kind of set at a kind of intermediate level. And we designed these kind of, I guess, bespoke bits of furniture completely from scratch. And there's a little handle that you can insert in that you wind up and down, and that kind of allows this relatively infinite height adjustment between kind of 60 centimeters at its lowest and about a meter at its tallest. And the kind of getting these right was absolutely critical to the project. So there's a huge amount of design and testing in these. The induction hobs are set in completely flush to the surface to allow the kids to kind of slide chopping boards and pans across, and there's no lip where they're gonna catch a pan and kind of tip hot water on themselves. They're also kind of carefully sized so that 3 children can work at each station. that means 30 kids can work in the whole space, which was quite a key requirement for the client's brief. And then the area below that datum is lined with a material called Virock. So that's on the floor and forming the splashbacks here. And Virock is a kind of very hard wearing timber cement board, but it also has a nice imperfect texture to it, almost a bit like a cast concrete texture, that kind of neatly tied into the brickwork outside. And we just felt it was a nice fit for the textures that were going on above. And so here you can see the kitchen in use, and everyone's kind of gathered around this central island while Tom explains the next steps of the recipe. And for us, this project is the kind of first proper large scale educational project we've worked on, and it's just an absolute joy to go back there and see the kids in the space and see them enjoying learning about food and interacting with food, and just it's just magnificent. And Tom is absolutely wonderful, the head chef. He's kind of so passionate and full of energy, and he just kind of whips them up into an excitement, and then off they go for an hour or so to complete their dishes. So really, there's not so much to talk about with the architecture in these photos, and I think that's really fundamental to this project. We're quite happy for the architecture to be kind of out of the way and take a back seat, as long as it's enabling the children to kind of have the best possible experience they can when they're in the space cooking. And so here a few more kind of shots of the kitchen in action. And then I'm just going to finish with a few kind of detail pictures that I hope kind of sum up what I've been talking about. And so here there's the kind of some old block work below where some wall finish had come loose, and then here the kind of the way the formwork was done for the windows and the renders kind of splurged out of that, and then here the trace of an old wall running up the side, all kind of just, we're not being precious about it. It's just it is what it is, and I think ultimately it adds texture and gives hints of the building's past, which we really liked. And of course, it's an extremely cheap way to finish all of this, because there's no kind of careful finishing that requires skilled labor. And here, this is the back of the former low-level window that goes out onto the street. And this was just simply infilled with block work and then again painted over, and then the datum line below which everything is a bit more controlled. And then externally, again, not being fussy about junctions that we might otherwise be fussy about in certain projects, but just making adjustments to the building in the most sensible fashion, I suppose. And so I'm just going to finish by talking to you a little bit about how the project's evolved. So it's been an absolutely great working relationship with the client, Chefs in Schools and LEAP. And we've been super fortunate that the project has won lots of awards recently, and there's loads of interest in the project. There's a great deal of interest in food education generally, and also the health issues that are associated with child food poverty or child malnutrition. And so for us, it's kind of, the project's kind of finished at this, it's kind of bizarrely kind of perfect moment where it's really at the heart of a lot of prescient news issues. And as such, kind of plans have unfolded to extend the scheme into this area of kind of redundant school playing ground. This is kind of at the moment really not very well used. And so we've been working with the school and the charity to develop a wider master plan for the site, which includes more productive gardens, a propagation house and a kind of potting shed, and completely re-landscaping this into a sort of with an orchard here, a smokery. This will become a multi-use teaching space, and then so here are a few visuals of the kind of proposed propagation house and the re-landscaping of the playground, including kind of much more natural and better kind of play elements and interactive educational elements. So yeah, I'm gonna leave it there. I've tried to kind of keep it relatively concise because I think it's always more interesting to respond to questions than just kind of endlessly waffle on. So I hope that that was okay, and yeah, I'll stop sharing and hopefully take some questions.
Right, thank you for that. That was a great lecture and really interesting project. And now we can just open it up to questions if anyone would like to turn on their mic and say anything, or then if not, we can go to the questions in the Padlet.
Can I ask you something first to break the ice, maybe? Because I was wondering at the beginning, you said how there was this building, the scary house, and how when you're a child, you perceive things in a different way as when you're an adult. So I was wondering, for example, while you were designing, did you wonder a lot how kids would perceive the school and perhaps some details that we don't notice, but maybe kids do? And when you design for children, do you have to stop thinking like an adult and perhaps think like more a child, or I don't know?
No, I think it's it is a great question, and I think it's always hard when you're preparing these talks because there's just not enough time to just talk about everything with the project. But we were, I think, for us, especially with the theme of this lecture, kind of when it's about designing for children, we were very keen that the project was warm and kind of joyful, but it wasn't infantile. And I think often when people get into conversations about designing for children, there becomes lots of, I guess, kind of ideas forced on about what children like. Children, it has to be kind of loads of bright colors, and it can become a little bit infantile. And our idea was that it still had to have all the functionality of a professional kitchen. So the surfaces were stainless steel because they're absolutely bulletproof and robust. But then some of the joinery below, you wouldn't normally find kind of oiled plywood in a professional kitchen. It was just to add a bit of warmth and kind of a bit of softness, I suppose. And so we tried not to think of it as kind of necessarily through the eyes of a child, I suppose. It sounds a bit of a strange approach, but hopefully in the kind of gardens and the way that the children interact with those are the things that it's sort of really about, I guess. You know, that garden can work just as well for a there's been, during the lockdown, they've had volunteers and lots of kind of retired pensioners in there kind of tending to the gardens, and it kind of works just as well for them as it does for a 5-year-old, or at least we hope. So yeah, I don't know, we didn't really ever kind of put the kind of children's glasses on and think about it that way, I don't think.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tom, for the great lecture. It's really is an amazing and very interesting project. So one of the first question on the Padlet is going back on your talk about how did you gain the confidence and skills in building? Was this through your undergraduate or postgraduate course or elsewhere?
So yeah, sorry, there's just not enough time to. I did a talk last week and I just totally ran out of time. So I tried to strip some stuff out. But Percy and myself, who founded Surman Weston, we had both outside of education had jobs around the construction industry. So I had worked in my summer holidays while I was a student on building sites. I had a relative who was a builder, and so I had done a little bit of that. And then we also, briefly both had an opportunity to build a stage for a music festival in between, that was in between part 1 and part 2. And so we had always kind of been interested in it, and we'd I guess picked up knowledge along the way. But really, when we started with the cafe and the writer's shed, we had some experience, but we were kind of pretty inexperienced. And then we just called upon kind of friends, or we had a friend of a friend who was a carpenter, and he kind of helped us build those projects. And so yeah, we had always done it, I suppose. I mean, more experience than perhaps the average architecture student, but definitely not loads.
Thank you. And the other question is, where do you start when you select a material palette for a new project, as you have such a careful consideration of the materiality of each project?
Well, again, really interesting. So the last time I talked about this project with people, I presented what we had done at competition stage, and the proposal at competition stage was quite drastically different from what we actually ended up doing. Rather than the kind of cedar slatted fence on the outside and I suppose the red of the Virock on the inside, it was a much more kind of colder, minty palette with metallic elements. And in this case, it evolved out of careful discussion with the clients. Between winning the competition and realizing the project, or kind of issuing the tender, we had about 10 design workshops with the client where we would go through things in detail, and the material palette just evolved. I hope that we've got a bit of a sensibility with combining materials, having done so much kind of hands-on work with them. But I think it's kind of half instinctive and then half just evolves as the project evolves naturally.
Mm-hmm. And another project is, another question is, how specific was the brief of the client and how much freedom did you have with it? So
the initial brief for the competition was relatively open, I suppose. They had defined the area, but there were some broad requirements. For example, in that initial brief, it wasn't stated that it was really important that 30 kids could cook in there. That was kind of a detail that wasn't in there. So our proposals evolved quite a lot from that. One thing that I would say is that they were an amazingly engaged client. So we were able to have really constructive, critical conversations with them where they would provide just the kind of right level of feedback. So they let us have our design freedom and trusted us. But when it was an issue that was really important to them in terms of function, or they're too strong about something, they would say, and we'd go off and come back. And I think the projects we've most enjoyed working on over the years are the ones where you have an engaged client, and it's not just this role of you're the architect, go off and do the design, I'm the kind of client, I'll just pay you at the end of it. It's so much better when you've got a client who's kind of pushing you and questioning everything you're doing.
And another question, how similar was this project to one of your previous projects, the Brunswick Cookery Cottage, which you already had experience with? Similar.
Yeah, so the Brunswick Cookery Cottage was a much simpler and I suppose less ambitious proposal. That school, they just wanted a kind of simple classroom space where they could teach 8 children, and the kids that they were teaching, it was kind of they were using it to teach children that were perhaps being a bit disruptive in other lessons, and there was no kind of wider brief beyond that. I mean, we definitely applied lessons we'd learned, especially in terms of the layout of the kitchen and how important it is that the educator can see everyone. And you know, when you've got, it's kind of, as a teacher, it's almost your worst nightmare when you've got 30 kids all with like a relatively sharp knife trying to cut a carrot for the first time. So things like that, we definitely took those lessons forward. a bit about the kind of robustness of materials that would make for a good space. But the great thing about this was that the chefs in schools and LEAP just had such an ambitious brief, and generally chefs in schools are just an amazingly ambitious organization. They sort of are now in about 40 schools, I think, across London, and there's hundreds of more schools on the waiting list. So they're I should be really honest. I think that the success of the project is only very small amount down to our architectural input. I mean, obviously we've tried to get that input just right, but really the project is about the amazing kind of vision and brief of transforming this redundant space into this food education hub, and how well they are now running it. It takes a huge amount of kind of curriculum development and getting other schools to come and engage with it. It's a massive effort on their part, and I feel like we've been a small part of that, and the architectural world, particularly in terms of awards, has kind of reacted really well to that. But it's you know, we're just a bit part in that process, I think.
Thank you. I think these are all the questions from the Padlet. So if anyone has any other last questions before go over to Fiona.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I really like the project, by the way. It's interesting that you get the chance to go back and expand on it. Is quite nice. There's something to do. Is there, you were talking about lessons you've taken forward from previous projects before. Is there any extra insight you get going back and building on what you've already made?
Yeah, I think so. Actually, last week we pitched for, there's a prize called the William Sutton Prize, and what we're hoping to do is develop a design manual, if you like, for other schools to be able to copy essentially this, because not every school can raise the funds to have their own kind of purpose-built food education hub. It's unrealistic that that's going to happen in every school, but what they can do is hopefully refer to this resource. And I spoke about the height adjustable cooking units that we had done, for example. They weren't perfect. It was a completely kind of new bit of furniture, I suppose. And after a while, it was found that although we had kind of tested it and the manufacturer of the mechanical system said it was fine, they were sort of slightly leaning where the weight of the units underneath were causing them to lean. So we made a little modification and fitted something under that would kind of provide a little bit of additional support. So we would love to go back and look at all the things that did so well and kind of include them in this booklet that others can then copy. And I guess with the, I don't know if you're familiar, if any of you are familiar with the Field and Fowls project at Waterloo City Farm or Oasis Farm, but it's a project in a similar vein that we were inspired by, and that project has evolved over sort of a number of years. I suppose they've gradually added different buildings and kind of different bits to the farm over the years, and I really hope that we get to do the same thing, because yeah, going back and getting involved with those clients again, talking to them about, they're very honest when stuff isn't working perfectly, and of course it doesn't all work perfectly. So I hope we can kind of keep going back and tweaking it over the years. We had another funding bid for that part 2 of the project, which was unsuccessful, which was a bit frustrating because we thought we were going to be able to kind of go on and do that, but the bid was unsuccessful. So it's kind of on the back burner for a bit.
Thank you.
Is there any other last questions or?
Yeah, I was just wondering, following your last answer, if you're familiar with the community classroom project of O'Donnell's Brown, because I feel that kind of like the intentions of both your studio and theirs were similar, and I can see how they can kind of be combined in one project. And it's interesting because they did as yours, kind of like they wanted it to be like almost like a product that could be manufactured for lots of sites, and it could just spread knowledge and people can learn outside of the four walls that we are familiar with. So I was just wondering if you've seen it, and whether you think that.
I do know the practice, but I haven't seen that particular project. I'll definitely have a look at it though. I mean, it sounds great. Something else that I didn't really get time to mention in the lecture was that a key part of the project, because this talk was focused around childhood, I didn't really mention it, but it's not just for school children. So part of the reason we tried to kind of break down that threshold a bit and allow views into the kitchen garden was that it's also for the community. So that space is available for local community groups, and it's also available to hire for, say, for example, birthday parties, or there's community groups that are planning to do special cookery lessons in there for people with sort of, say, certain health conditions, so diabetes or that kind of thing. So it was important to us that it had this public face, but I didn't really dwell on it too much then, because it's kind of going off on a bit of a tangent.
Yeah. Thank you. Like, I really loved when you said that sometimes architecture should step back and just leave the users to enjoy, the simplicity of the project. And I mean, that's amazing how you're thinking about the community. And I think that's why I thought about the two projects simultaneously, just because of your intention, which is great.
Yeah, I think.
Congratulations for that.
Yeah, I think I didn't show a lot of, I basically in those initial intro projects just showed a few of the things we had built, but then there's lots of other projects where we've not built them. There's a kind of house we did in Surbiton where that's so much about the kind of crafted object, and on this one it was really nice to take this more loose fit approach, and we actually found that we really enjoyed the process more and found it really liberating. And I think had we tried to control everything like we're maybe guilty of doing on some of our other projects, it would have ended up a lot worse. So I think we'll try and do a bit more of that going forward.
That's amazing. Yeah. Keep the good job.
Thank you. Can I just say, oh, sorry.
Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, after you, Fiona.
No, it's fine.
I just wanted to say, I think it's really nice to be invited to one of these talks where there's clearly been a lot of thought gone into the actual kind of construction of the lecture series itself. I think it's a really nice idea, this working backwards. And yeah, I don't know, the way you introduced it at the start, I think, yeah, congratulations for kind of curating this nice series. It's nice to have been a part of it.
Yeah, thank you. We've really enjoyed organizing the year, and I think it sort of creates a more interesting engagement with everyone too when you have an overarching theme, and it sort of makes everyone question it a bit more.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for your talk, and I'm really glad you were a part of this. And I'd also like to take a moment to thank the rest of the A131 team, specifically Elena, Edo, and Julia, for organizing the series and just getting everything together. So our next lecture will be in 2 weeks again, like normal. And I suggest you all come and see what the rest of our series is like, because we've got a few other good speakers left in the year, and I think it'll be a really good end to it. So thank you to everyone.
You are invited as well if you want to come.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much for having me. We've not done too many of this kind of thing, so I hope it was okay. I mean, we're very much learning our craft, so yeah, I hope it was okay. I've watched over the last few weeks. I watched a lecture by Anne Holthrop. I don't know if you know Anne Holthrop, Dutch architect, and David Leach. And they were both kind of intimidatingly brilliant lectures. So I was quite nervous about doing this. So yeah, anyway, I hope it was okay.
It was great.
Well,
It was great. Thank you.
thank you very
so
much.
much.
Okay, well,
Thank you.
have a nice evening, everybody. Thanks for having me.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Everyone. See
Bye-bye,
you next
bye.
time.
Enjoy France.
Thank you.